Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Editor-in-Chief, Breitbart News, Alexander Marlow.
Good evening, CPAC. Thank you. My name is Alexander Marlow, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, and I was also the first employee of Andrew Breitbart's media empire, way back in 2008. In 2014, we opened up an entire site dedicated to UK politics called Breitbart London, which I'm happy to report is thriving. Of course, people asked us why you, an American media company centered in Los Angeles, open up a UK-centric site so soon. And I always had a cynical answer for them. It's a cautionary tale, I would say, a warning about what America will become if we trend in this direction towards a secular, social democratic society under President Obama. But tonight, I'd like to take an opportunity to revise that answer. Breitbart London is here to track a revolt, and it's against the political establishment and the global elites. And that revolt is being led by a party called Ukip and a man you'll soon meet named Nigel Farage. The United Kingdom Independence Party is led by this man named Nigel Farage, who's also a member of European Parliament. His brand is populist through and through. He's a resilient family man with 4 children, and he's cheated death thrice. He's been run over by a car, he's beat cancer, and no joke, he survived a plane crash. He's earned his massive following thanks to his straight talk and common sense policy ideas, and his signature issue is immigration. He's trying to keep the United Kingdom sovereign as opposed to being governed by the elites in the European Union. Because apparently, even island nations can have porous borders when things are left to the political establishment. He's also the only UK politician who's told the truth about the Islamist threat. He's a gregarious everyman, and he's built his populist coalition with people from all sides of the aisle. And he's a living, breathing, smoking, drinking protest to political correctness. You can most commonly find him with a beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. We were actually trying to wrangle him earlier because he was having a cigar, I believe. It was nervous time backstage. He's also weathered media storms. He once said that women are worth less to government officials and bureaucrats. The headlines blared, Nigel Farage says women are worthless. And recently, after 20 years of hard work, dedication, and being called all sorts of ugly names that he's actually continued to be called today, he's a winner. Ukip lined up a string of victories in 2014. It once was called a joke by Nigel Farage in 2010, pulling 3% in the polls. Now Ukip is close to 20% support. A revolution is afoot, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm honored to introduce to you the leader, Nigel Farage.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm here today as the leader of an insurgent political force in the United Kingdom, a political force that has taken on the establishment and rocked them to the backs of their heels. Our party colour is purple, and what happened in 2014 was a purple revolution, because we won the European elections back on May 22nd last year. And later on in the autumn, 2 existing Conservative members of Parliament didn't just cross the floor to join Ukip, but they had the honour and the integrity to resign their seats as members of Parliament and to offer themselves up to the electorate in by-elections or special elections, as you call them, on the basis, as both of them said, that in fact it's the people that are the bosses, something I think that is forgotten by politicians in Westminster and Brussels, and I'm guessing probably in Washington too. So they offer themselves up, and they both won those by-elections, so Ukip rode high all through 2014. But if you think about it, you know, I come from another country that speaks English, that has a first-past-the-post electoral system, and has had two-party domination of politics for the last couple of 100 years. How is it, set against that a third party has managed to make an insurgency of this scale? Well, it wasn't easy, and it took a long time. And I stood for Ukip all through the 1990s, in election after election. I think my lowest score was 1.2% back in the early 90s, and I wondered for a bit whether I might be the patron saint of lost causes. But my original reason for getting into politics was that I thought something had gone fundamentally wrong. Now, it's good to be back in America, because I used to visit here a lot, because for 12 years I worked for American companies. Did you hear that, folks? I worked. I had a job before getting involved in politics. How about that? That's pretty unusual these days, isn't it? But I was working in business. What I saw was a Westminster political elite where the left and the right had effectively merged together in a new form of social democracy. And what they'd done is they transferred what I saw as my birthright, what I saw as the very thing that those that went before us fought to defend, namely our independence, our democracy, our pride, our self-respect, and they'd handed it over to a set of institutions in Brussels run by a bunch of old men who nobody had ever voted for and nobody could ever remove. And I resolved that I was going to do something about it, that I wanted my country back. So in the end, I got elected to the European Parliament, and how lucky I was, because I had the opportunity to actually, in close quarter, do combat with the very unelected old men that I'd worried about in the first place. And for those of you that have watched me on YouTube, I suspect that my experience in the European Parliament has given me far greater pleasure than Mr. Barroso or Herman Van Rompuy. But UKIP worked, and UKIP began to achieve success because people understood that the issues that we were talking about were the very issues that our political elite refused to discuss, and the very issues that our so-called liberal media said should not be discussed in polite company. And I'm talking particularly about the issue of immigration. It has been taken now for decades in Britain that if you discuss immigration, it means that you're a bad person. If you discuss immigration, it means that you harbor dislike or hatred or prejudice of somebody else. And actually, all I've ever said is that Britain is actually a very small island, and that we cannot go on absorbing a net inflow of up to 250,000 people to British cities every single year. And that as members of the European Union, there is nothing we can do about it, because we have an open door now to nearly 500 million people. So I made the arguments on immigration. I made the arguments that actually, far from Europe being a structure that would bring us peace and harmony, it was a structure that would effectively knock our heads together and make us dislike and distrust each other. And I warned from day one that the euro was a project that was doomed to failure. And folks, I put it to you, if you look at the plight today in the Mediterranean, I was right from the very beginning. For for those that are watching the Eurozone crisis, we've seen the election in Greece of a radical left government, and for the moment, they've blinked. The Germans, the Troika, the ECB, and indeed the International Monetary Fund have scored the first round of victories against this Greek government, but don't think that's the end of the matter, because in another 4 months' time, the next renegotiation comes up. And don't think that it's just Greece that is blighted with this. The same is going on in Spain, and in Portugal, and in Italy, and in Cyprus. And if you think back to the bad old days of the 1930s, to the buddy, can you spare us a dime? Bear in mind the Greek economy has fallen by nearly double what the American economy fell by back in the 1930s, because they've artificially pegged their currency to the German currency. So don't think, please, that I'm just a British politician who simply wants the United Kingdom to be outside the supranational structures of the European Union, and I couldn't care less what happens in the rest of Europe. I actually care a lot what happens in the rest of Europe. My own family were French Protestant Huguenots who fled and took refugee status in the United Kingdom. I'm married to a girl from Germany, so nobody needs to tell me about the dangers of living in a German-dominated household. She always begs me not to tell that one, but never mind. I enjoy it, and that's what really matters, isn't it? And hey, shouldn't politics be fun anyway? Of course it should. Of course it should. Now, the point I'm making is this. I am actually against the European project. I want all the countries of Europe to be free, independent, self-governing democracies with their own currencies, and I will not rest until we get that. But UKIP has also cut through because we've begun to represent a group of people who have been completely left behind by the European project, but actually, folks, left behind by something that I think I can identify in modern-day America as well. We have had the growth of corporatism, big businesses, big banks, and big governments, structures within which we finish up with our private sector industries massively over-regulated, a situation in which the small man and the small woman simply cannot compete with the big guys in this over-regulated structure. And what these people have found, certainly in Britain, is that there is nobody there to speak for them. And what UKIP has become, we've become the party that stands for aspiration. I reckon the earlier people get up of a morning to go to work, the higher their propensity in British politics to vote for UKIP. I'm talking about people for whom the last 10 years mean they can earn enough money to get by, but they can't earn enough money to get ahead. And corporatism and over-regulation and big global politics don't work for them. So we've cut through, and we've got these people voting for us in Britain now in very large numbers. In fact, what UKIP has done is to cross the class divide of British politics. And if I can say one thing about American politics, an observation, and I accept that I'm a foreigner, I accept that I'm a guest, and I don't want a medal. But let me say this. If the Republican Party is going to win the next presidential election, I think the Republican Party needs to get the kind of people voting for it that were voting for it 30 years ago. Do you remember the Reagan Democrats? These were people who worked hard. These were people who were patriotic. These were people who aspired and wanted to get on. And I don't think at the moment the Republican Party is actually attracting those kind of people. So I would say to you, you've got to reach out to those grassroots. You've got to try and get those kind of voters voting for you. But can I also say, and perhaps this will be difficult for some people to accept, can I also say that despite the fact that 75% of our laws in Britain are made in Brussels, there's one area where we have made our own decisions for the last 15, 20 years, and that is foreign policy. And we have been joined at the hip with America, and we have been involved, folks, in an endless series of overseas engagements and wars. And I think the time has come for us to assess whether that action has been successful. Now remember, every time we get involved, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Libya, which, by the way, we have made very much worse than it was before we bombed the place and got rid of Gaddafi. Every time we do these things, we're told by our leaders it's to make the streets of London and the streets of New York safer. I would put it to you 15 years on that far from doing that, we've actually inflamed and stoked the fires of militant Islamism by doing what we have done. That doesn't mean that I don't see ISIS as a great threat. I see ISIS as the greatest threat we face in the free world today. I do. But for us to deal with this, it's not going to need American or British boots on the ground. What it's going to need is on a concerted level across the Middle East and many parts of Northern Africa. It's going to need the armies and the people of those countries to have their feet on the ground. And for us to provide help and support and expertise and all of those things. But can I put this to you, folks? I actually think what we really need to be focusing on is not the never-ending series of wars overseas, but it's the potential wars that we face in our own countries. And I see an American president who doesn't actually have the courage to address the central issue of what has gone wrong and why those 3 people were arrested on the streets of the USA yesterday. We have all in the West, mistakenly, and I think in a very cowardly manner, we have pursued a policy of multiculturalism. We have pursued a policy of actually encouraging division within our societies, rather than pursuing a policy of where we should all come together. And yes, there are different religions, and yes, there are different private observances, but if we're not to live together in one country, under one law, then what hope is there for our children and grandchildren? And the message we've got to put out is this: we must stand firm and defend our Judeo-Christian culture. We must make it clear that we believe in common law and not Sharia law. And we must stand up and fight. We must stand up and fight for liberty, for freedom, for democracy, and not to be cowed by political correctness, not to be cowed by fear of being criticized. And I would say this to you: I have always, my whole life, had a great love of America and a massive respect for what those that went before us did together. From the Meuse-Argonne through Normandy and all the way to Berlin. If Britain and America had not been together, much of the world would not be free. We should be massively proud of our achievements. We should be massively proud of our achievements in past times, but we should be aware that we now have in our countries, sadly, an enemy within, a fifth column, as I've called it in the past. And we have got to get a grip on this situation. We've got to reassert who we are and what we stand for. And I want Britain and America to be the best of friends and the best of allies going on from here. But I want liberal democracy in the West to succeed. And if we want that, folks, we are going to have to stand up and fight for it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.